It's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Erev Pesach and freedom of conscience. If we ask ourselves, what is Erev Pesach? I understand Erev is Erev, it's the eve of a holiday, eve of Pesach. But why is this eve different from all other eves? The eve of Shabbos, you don't start not working on Erev Shabbos. The eve of Shavuos is not Shavuos. What's this business that the eve of Pesach you can't eat matzah? According to the Rambam, you violate do not eat chametz, which is said regarding Pesach. You violate that if you eat on Erev Pesach. According to Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara, in the Mishnah. According to Rashi, it could be that the prohibition of not possessing chametz, bal yirod, bal yimatzeh, for 7 days, it's really 7.5 days. It applies on the eve of Pesach as well. According to the Tosfos, the mitzvah of tashbizu, of destroying chametz, is a Torah law, and it must be done on the eve of Pesach. The bir chametz, according to those who say it's sreifa, it's burning, it must be done, according to the original theory, afternoon of Pesach. What is this business? The Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, is not slaughtered on a holiday at the Seder, it's slaughtered during the day. Now, it's true, sacrifices have to be offered during the day. But what's this business that the holiday of Matzos, the 7-day holiday, is not the time of the slaughtering of the Pesach? The slaughtering of the Pesach is before Pesach. Erev Pesach is, in Talmudic, in biblical terms, it's Pesach. Chag HaMatzos is the 7-day holiday, and Pesach, Erev Pesach, what we call Erev Pesach, is really Erev Chag HaMatzos, and it's called in the Torah Pesach. That day is Pesach. It's very serious. What is this day? The day before. Also, what is this business that in Egypt they had the first Seder? First Seder. They were still in Egypt. How could you celebrate the holiday of freedom if they were still in Egypt? So what's the answer? The answer is that they had a mitzvah. When you have a mitzvah of slaughtering the Paschal Lamb, you have a mitzvah of eating the Paschal Lamb, eating the matzah and the maror, person who has mitzvos is free. He's acting according to his conscience. When you act according to your conscience, you are free. And therefore, it is part of Pesach already, even though they haven't gone out of Egypt yet. The truth is, the Haggadah says, Yochel Rosh Chodesh. Maybe you could do the Haggadah from Rosh Chodesh. What's so significant about Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh was the time, the first day of Nisan was the day when Jews got their first mitzvah collectively to keep Rosh Chodesh and to intercalate the calendar and to designate each month when the Rosh Chodesh is, and that Nisan is the first month. All those mitzvahs were done on the first day of Nisan. So you might have thought that the Seder really begins then, because the freedom of conscience begins with the first mitzvahs that the Jews collectively had. They're not slaves anymore if they have mitzvahs. And then the Mechilta goes on, the Medrash in the Haggadah goes on, Yochel Mibod Yom. All right, so you don't say the Haggadah 2 weeks before Rosh Chodesh. Maybe you could do the Haggadah the day before. Why? Because the freedom of conscience began the day before with the slaughtering of the Pesach. That's when the freedom of conscience began. Michael Rosenzweig, my Mechutin, said, why is the shechita as a Pesach? According to many authorities, it's the shechita, the shechting of the Pesach, the slaughtering of the Paschal Lamb. That's the mitzvah, not the eating. It's the slaughtering. Why? Because the act of slaughtering was a tremendous act of freedom of conscience. The Egyptians had some veneration of sheep, and we slaughtered that sheep. With freedom of conscience, we go free. You go free. That's a holiday. Erev Pesach is a holiday of freedom of conscience. So it turns out that Pesach is not really a celebration of going out of Egypt, in a sense, because the very first Pesach was celebrated before they went out of Egypt. And every year we commemorate that night. What was that night? They didn't go out that night. There's a debate of whether we went out after midnight or not, but probably we went out, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, at broad daylight we went out of Egypt. So why do we celebrate at night? We celebrate the freedom of conscience that the Jews slaughtered and ate the Paschal Lamb at that very first night, on that night. So it turns out, what is slavery? Slavery is when when I am enslaved by my ego, but what I want to do, regardless of my Yetzer Tov, my good inclination, which tells me what I should be doing. When I can't do what my own good inclination tells me to do, I'm a slave to some other authority. When do I have freedom? Freedom is when I act according to my good conscience. Freedom is when I act according to my Yetzer Tov, when I act according to logic, according to morals and values, according to the mitzvah of God. That is freedom. And that's what we celebrate that night. Not the actual going out of Egypt. No, that was during the day. We celebrate the night when the Jews showed freedom of conscience. So it turns out that Erev Pesach is a holiday, not so much of the exodus from Egypt, that's Pesach. The Erev Pesach, and even the night of Pesach, the first night, which is part of that Paschal holiday, the Pesach, what the Torah in Torah language calls Pesach. Pesach starts midday on the 14th, and it continues through the night of the Seder, and it's over the next morning. That's already the holiday of Matzos. You know what Pesach is? The holiday of Matzos, that's a holiday of freedom. But you know what Pesach is? Pesach and Erev Pesach, you know what it is? It's a holiday of freedom of conscience. If we're free to act according to our conscience, there's no one beating us over the head and saying, you can't do that. You're not free to do that. There's no one. Sometimes when we live outside of our own country, people tell us, no, you can't keep Shabbos. We have a 6-day work week. You can't take off for Pesach. This is a regular day. Easter is next week. Then that's not freedom. Freedom is when you are able to follow your conscience, to follow your religion, when you have total freedom of religion and freedom of conscience, to act according to your greatest and deepest commitments and instincts. That is freedom. That's what Pesach celebrates. That's what Erev Pesach is all about. That's why there's a separate holiday for Erev Pesach. It's the celebration, as my Mechuden, Michael Rosenzweig said, the celebration of acting according to your conscience, showing true freedom, of walking right in the face of the Egyptian mores of where you venerate the sheep and slaughtering it, eating it, and acting according to the word of God and the commandment of God. That is something to celebrate. That's what we celebrate, the freedom of conscience of the Jews in Egypt, that even though they were still physically in Egypt, they had freedom to act according to their conscience. And that is something to celebrate. We thank you for joining us here at the Baron Hirsch Congregation for our discussion of the Erev Pesach. We wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.